about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Liberty Talk Radio, I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio and America's Libertarian network. Today we are so pleased to have Dr. Robert McGee as our guest. He's a returning guest. He was with us a few months ago. Dr. McGee has earned 13 doctorates from universities in the United States as well as European countries. He is an Amazon best-selling novelist, national Taekwondo champion, attorney, and CPA who espouses libertarian principles. I mean, I wonder what he does in his free time, in his spare time. Mr. McGee will give us his perspective on issues of gay marriage, minimum wage laws, gun control, the Greek bailout, as well as others. We welcome you to call in 646-652-4620 with any questions or comments during our live broadcast. And by the way, the live broadcast, it's Monday. On July 20th, it is now about 8:06 a.m. in the morning, so that'll give you an idea. We should be here for about an hour, but we welcome Mr. McGee. Is he on the line yet?
Yes,
Dr.
I'm right
McGee,
here.
Thank you so much. We're awfully sorry that we had this. We have not had that problem before. We've had every other problem in the book. This one's a new one. So maybe you uncovered a glitch or a problem in our system that we need to resolve. And I'm sorry, you're the one that's taking the brunt of it. But thank you so much for being on our program and returning to our show.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
Well, Doctor, we haven't talked about this. If you don't mind, is it okay if I ask a couple of questions about the Iranian situation, the controls that we have on their trade? You know, the what do they call the embargo or whatever they call it, the trade sanctions. I'm sorry, trade sanctions. That's the word I was looking for.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
I'm not an expert on that topic, but I'll do what I can.
But let me give you my limited, somewhat perspective from what I think is a libertarian perspective. Who the heck are we to impose sanctions on anyone for any reason when the last time the Persian state of Iran, I say Persian because everyone believes that they are an Arab nation, but they're a Persian nation, of Iran, has literally attacked another nation, was 214 years ago, close to the start of our republic. And if you look at us recently, we have been almost on an annual basis attacking other nations. And yet we call them the aggressors, thus we must impose sanctions upon them. First of all, where is the moral authority that allows us to impose sanctions on anyone unless I, as an individual, elect not to trade with Iran for whatever reason, or any other country for that reason? If I elect to trade with, prefer to trade with Chile or Argentina rather than Iran, that would be my choice. That would be my sanction, if you will, for whatever reason. But what right does a country have that whose leaders are purportedly the servants of the people, placing sanctions on a sovereign country and restricting my right to trade? Now, please tell me if I should go out and maybe get a shot or see my doctor.
Well, you're on the right track, actually, because free trade means consenting adults can trade what they have for what they want without government interference. And I remember reading about some sanctions against Canada, one of our big trading partners. We have some kind of sanctions against them for the lumber industry in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Their lumber producers are able to undersell our lumber producers. And the lumber industry in the United States got together and they said, you're guilty of unfair trade practices. So we have some kind of sanctions against Canada for lumber. I mean, sanctions tend to be used for protectionist purposes or maybe to punish people because we don't like what they do. And There were some big studies by the Peterson Institute of International Economics in Washington where they measured how successful sanctions were, and basically they fail if by failure you mean you can't change the behavior of the target country. They're not going to change what they're doing just because of sanctions. We just make enemies. We increase prices to consumers. We cut off trade. Sometimes it leads to sanctions that they impose upon us as well. So their people get hurt, just like in the Cuban thing that we've had since like 1959 or 1960. The Cuban people get hurt by those, and it also gives the leaders of those countries an excuse to say that America is a great devil, and they can unite the people, whereas otherwise they'd be divided because their economy is in a basket case situation. So it's a lose-lose situation, really. I mean, if you apply utilitarian theory where, the losers exceed the winners, both sides lose in sanctions, and that's true all the time. And sanctions are very rarely successful in the sense that they very seldom change the behavior of the target country. And Iran's one example of that. The people get hurt by that, but the people in charge of the economy, the leaders, they don't get hurt. They use it as an excuse to show that America is an evil country.
Yeah, about 20 years or so ago, maybe more than that, and as I get older, the decades seem to meld into one another, by the way. But James Buchanan, I believe it was, had a survey taken, and I don't know if he was responsible for it or he just reported on it. But what they attempted to do is get an idea from not the governments, but the actual people on the street as to what their opinion was about America. And whether or not they liked America, they wanted to be like Americans. And I don't know the language, but it was sort of, do you want to be like America type thing. And every country in the world that would participate, they compiled these statistics. And it shocked the heck out of everyone in that the country that wanted to be more like America and have a relationship with America and trade with America at that time was Iran. And they just could not figure it out until they realized the reason for that was that because the Ayatollah Khomeini was in power and we were sort of left out of Iranian affairs altogether. They were sort of isolated themselves from us. And the people themselves, learned what was going on around the world. I mean, they couldn't shut everything out. And they saw the opportunities in America. They saw everything from it was rock and roll too as well. And everything about it. They wanted to be Americans because we left them alone. We were not telling them what to do. Their leaders were telling them what to do, and they didn't like it. And they wanted to really get rid of their leaders and be more like the United States. And you would have thought that lesson would have taught everyone something, would have taught us saying, hey, if we leave these countries alone, we let them pursue their own course, and we, in fact, complement what they want to do, provided it's not illegal or moral or whatever, there can be harmony in this world. I mean, that was an excellent example and an excellent opportunity, and we blew it big time by sending troops to and money to the deposing the duly elected leader of Iraq, putting in Saddam Hussein, supplying him with weapons of mass destruction to fight against Iran. And it seems that we are so self-defeating and so disingenuous. I'm embarrassed when people defend America when it comes to relationships with Iran. Now, have I lost it somewhere? Am I way off track? Just help me out, because it's about driving me nuts.
No, you're on the right track. I've read about other polls like that too, that people in other countries, they like Americans, but they don't like the American government. And right. I run into that myself in my travels whenever I lecture abroad. they say, what is it with your government? Americans are okay. We like the way your economy is structured. It's free market, and not as many restrictions, although that's starting to change too. But, what's with your government? They go around invading all these countries. They're slapping sanctions on us, for no reason, and they're doing the same thing. They're subsidizing their own industries, but they're penalizing us for subsidizing our industries. And, there's like a total disconnect. Like, we lecture them on what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and then we do exactly the same thing. And, they just don't see what's going on and how we can keep electing these people. And I don't really know how to respond to that. But I get the same thing wherever I go.
Yeah, well, my response to it would be, yes, I agree with you. I mean, I think this is a great country, but we have a horrible government. I mean, we have an oppressive government, and a government that lies through its teeth constantly. We can't get a straight answer from anyone, and our elected officials, unfortunately, when they get to Washington, eventually become so corrupt because there's so much money involved. There's this cronyism with big industry. It's like hanging around with friends that all take drugs. Eventually you'll try a drug and get hooked on the drugs, and you become a drug addict. And it seems like that's what happens when people go to Washington, even when their intentions are honorable up front. But let me ask you this question. Do we have any moral authority, or do we have any legal authority, from your perspective, to impose sanctions on any country at all, regardless of the reason, as from a country point of view, not from an individual point of view?
No, none that I can think of. I mean, if you begin with the basic premise that you shouldn't be the initiator of force or aggression, these sanctions are all really aggressive. In fact, it reminds me of what Roosevelt did to the Japanese before World War II. He confiscated their assets in the United States. He and a little coalition of 3 or 4 other countries tried to cut off the shipment of war material so that they couldn't invade Manchuria and so forth. And the Japanese felt compelled to attack the United States and destroy the fleet so that the war material could go to Manchuria.
Yeah.
And the sanctions actually got us into World War II indirectly. That was the reason they bombed Pearl Harbor, was to break up the fleet so that the sanctions could be broken, or the blockade.
Right.
And
yeah.
there are a lot of lesser cases too. Just about any sanction that you look at, somebody in the United States loses and maybe somebody gains if it's a protectionist kind of thing. Like that lumber in the Pacific Northwest. The people who cut down the lumber in Washington and Oregon and Northern California and so forth, they can charge more for their lumber now because we're placing sanctions against Canada.
Yeah, the only losers there are the American people.
Yeah, people have to pay more for anything that's made of lumber.
Right.
And, same with oil. We impose sanctions. I heard something on TV the other day that gasoline prices are going to drop because we're ending the sanctions on Iran, and they could drop below $2 a gallon now. And, that's the price that Americans have to pay for sanctions. They just don't realize it.
Right.
They blame the oil companies for high gas prices, but some of that price is because we're blockading Iranian oil.
I better sell all my oil stocks right before it gets too bad, right? God, I lost a fortune. I've lost a fortune in oil. I tell you, I'm such a good stock picker. I don't even pick the right sectors. I lost a fortune in natural gas and then oil, and I said, boy, I'm on a tear, aren't I? So, but there seems to be this impression that the Americans have been brainwashed with, that free trade is a win-lose proposition. In free trade, if you lose, what they don't really understand or comprehend, and which we never say, especially on mainstream media, is that free trade is a win-win, even when it comes to China. If there was truly free trade, yes, many jobs would go over to China that do manual labor type of jobs that are just not viable to do here. But by making them more wealthy, they in turn raise their standard of living and are able to buy items that are made here in the United States, whether they be Apple computers or whatever it is. So it always raises all boats. It's not instantaneous, but everyone gains with free range. There are no losers. But whenever there are restrictions, isn't there always a winner and a loser, but eventually both lose?
Yeah, that's right. Free trade is a win-win situation because both parties gain. Otherwise, it wouldn't make the trade. And a lot of economists have made studies where they estimate how many jobs are lost and how many jobs are gained as a result of certain trade sanctions. And the ratio is generally 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, meaning that for every job that's lost to free trade, 2 or 3 jobs are gained because the market works more efficiently. And, we lose some jobs by trading with China, but then we gain more jobs because we can shift our resources to more productive uses, and the export industry or the import industry expands. If we buy Japanese cars, for instance, we have to have American car dealers to sell the cars.
Right.
And they have to employ people, and nobody ever looks at those job gains. They only look at the job losses in Detroit. They don't look at the job gains on the West Coast where these cars come into the country and so forth. And just about every economic study that's been done concludes that there's more to gain than there is to lose by free trade. The problem is you can see people on the unemployment lines. You can't see the new jobs that are created because those people are working someplace other than an unemployment line.
Yeah.
So there's a built-in bias in favor of protectionists because you can see the losses, but you can't see the gains.
Yeah. Our mainstream media never seems to educate the populace very well. Before the influx of Japanese cars coming to America, I mean, we made some really neat-looking cars. The only problem was they didn't work very well. I recall, and I'm sure you're old enough to remember, if you had an American car and you had over 40,000 miles on it, you couldn't sell that sucker because it had too many miles on it. And people were buying these Japanese cars and they were saying, hey, I have 150,000 miles. I said, it's not possible. Engines don't last that long. But they were. And we had to catch up in quality. So it was a win-win for us because our cars really, we had to become competitive. So we started making cars with better tolerances, a lot better than we had before. And we had to restructure our manufacturing to make sure that, people didn't come on the assembly lines, half crocked and didn't know what they were doing and left the door panel off. Or there's stories of beer cans being placed in the fender wells and stuff like that and shaking like crazy when people drove the car. But we had to do away with that because made us better for it. And the same thing goes for China. We complain about China that the Chinese factories only pay $1 or $2 a day. But what they fail to realize is that the people who have that job for $1 a day before were making only $1 a week. In their village, and that was actually an incredible increase in the standard of living for the people in China. They weren't sweatshops; they were just upgrades to where people were before. They were just behind the curve relative to us. So no one was being mean about it, and of course you didn't have to work. You could stay on your farm. People got off the farms because they made more money in these quote sweatshops or these factories. And but our media doesn't do a very good job of ever giving both sides of the story. Why is that?
Well, several reasons. Well, one thing, they're not educated in economics, most of them. But I think another thing, there's a bias, against the free market system. That they think government is the solution. And I mean, polls have been taken. They asked these news people, who did you vote for in the last election? And that the vast majority of them vote for the Democratic candidates.
Yeah.
The Democrats tend to be somewhat more anti-market than the Republicans. I can't really say the Republicans are a free market party because they're not. It's just that they don't restrict it quite as much. But I think there's a built-in news bias, and a lot of people would agree that even when you ask a Democratic journalist, do you know any Republican journalists, they have to think for a minute to come up with one.
That's a good point.
Unless they think about Fox News people, may be the exception, but other than that, so there's a built-in anti-market bias, and it's not just in the United States. Whenever I go to Europe and I listen to their television stations, it's the same thing. In some cases, they're even worse. They think that everyone who has a business exploit. Nobody's protecting people from the government officials who are making all these counterproductive rules.
Yep.
So
Well,
I don't know how to eliminate that built-in bias, because it's been there ever since I was born, as far as I can tell. And
well,
probably
I
even
think we could
before
do that through programs such as this, and you getting on the pipe and talking this up. I think if enough people start talking, eventually it'll seep in people's minds that there really is an alternative, that the government is not the answer. In fact, placing the government on a hiatus somewhere is probably the answer. But let me ask you this. This is maybe an unfair question, but I get this question more than any other question. They all ask me, what do I think of Donald Trump? and I have to ask you, because I'm asked every single day, what do I think of Donald Trump? And so I'm gonna just throw that out at you, because I think I'll give you my take on it. I think he's fantastic in that I agree with very little of what he says, but I love listening to him, because at least he's honest with himself. Yeah. But what's your take on Donald Trump?
I love whenever I see him come on TV, because I know it's going to be entertaining.
Oh yeah, it's great.
He's going to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a populist kind of guy, in the sense that he appeals to the people. And now, unfortunately, a lot of the people, they don't have time, they don't have the inclination to study the issues, so they don't know that. But he's really interesting to talk to. Like the thing with John McCain the other day. I mean, the Republicans don't attack John McCain because he's a supposed war hero.
Yeah.
Because he spent 5 or 7 years, whatever it was, in a prison camp.
Right.
Does that really make you a war hero? And he prefers guys who weren't captured. And he called McCain a dummy because he graduated at the bottom of his class. And other Republicans don't want to point that out, because the poor guy was injured. He can't raise one of his arms above a certain bones were broken in the crash landing and so forth. And you don't want to say anything bad against him. Just like Biden, he was president, no one wanted to criticize him because he was a war hero.
That's right.
And so forth. But if you look at the guy's policies, these guys like McCain, he never saw a war he didn't like. Pretty much, he wants to invade everybody. He wants to bomb Syria. He wants to bomb everybody. And if you pointed out what the Canadians are doing to us on lumber, he'd probably want to bomb Canada. And yet that guy got the Republican nod for president. Huh?
Yeah, I mean that is scary when you think the American public can't even think through the most obvious violations of logic and law, and they can't think through it. I guess their TV programs are just filled in their head and fill up their brains, and they don't have room to think. All right, you had mentioned an email to me that you might want to discuss items such as the and some others. Well, why don't I leave it up to you, because I have a million questions for you, but I want to hear what you want to have to say and what subjects you want to talk about.
Okay. Well, my view on gay marriage is a little different than what you hear in the media. Although recently, some people have been sort of view the topic, and I look at things like when should government intervene, that kind of thing. When should government prevent people from doing stuff? And if you begin with the premise is a right, that you have the right to get married, then why do we have marriage licenses? Because a license means you need government permission.
That's correct.
And so I would say, I said this even before that recent Supreme Court ruling, well, why don't we just treat marriage like any other contract, and people over a certain age, whatever you define it as, maybe 18 or maybe 15, depending on state, they just enter into whatever kind of contract they want. And it should be a written contract just for common sense purposes, so you can prove what the terms were later. Maybe get it notarized, maybe not, maybe publish the terms, maybe not, but that should be up to the people. And if government has any role at all, it should be to enforce the terms of the contract. And shortly after that Supreme Court decision, I read that some states and some counties or municipalities wanted to just do away with marriage licenses, so no one would have to decline, if somebody wanted to come in and get one. Just say no license is required to get married. And, that's my position. And a couple of municipalities have started doing that, which I think is refreshing. Of course, then there's the other end of the thing too. If someone refuses to marry a gay couple, or if they refuse to make a birthday cake or a wedding cake or something for them, then they get fined $135,000. I think that's outrageous.
I thought that debate was insane, but absolutely insane.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the Civil Rights Act in 1964, actually, because, before that you could refuse, if you were a white restaurant owner, you could refuse to provide service to blacks, and made that a crime. And, look good on the surface that now blacks have equal rights and so forth. But it also means the restaurant owners no longer have a property right in the sense that they have to serve everybody. And then there's that, I think it was the 13th Amendment, involuntary servitude, where, you're being forced to work. And that post-Civil War amendment on involuntary servitude was meant to apply to slaves, to make it illegal to have slaves. But now restaurant owners have to serve everybody. And what if a waitress doesn't want to serve somebody? If she's forced to serve somebody, that's involuntary servitude too. And, that all started with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and now they're expanding it to this, where you have to provide service to gays, and presumably gays have to provide service to fundamentalist Christians who think that homosexuality is an abomination. It's all a violation of somebody's property rights. So, in my own view, is that business owners should be able to serve or not serve anybody they want for any reason they want, because that's a property right. And if the government tells they have to serve somebody or they can't serve somebody else, that violates both the right to property and the right to contract, and the right to association to a certain extent. So, I think that they shouldn't fine bakers and pizza makers for refusing to do business with certain groups. And it's not just gays, it should be any group. They should be free to do business or not do business with anybody they want. And Walter Block wrote a book on this, many years ago. I forget the name of it. Something about, what's the name of that book? I forget the name of the book, but it's a sort of classic book within the literature, where he looks at all these evil people, and he says basically there's a right to be a bigot. You should be able to think and say anything you want, as long as you don't violate anyone's rights. You should be able to do anything you want. Of course, gays say that they have a right to a wedding cake or to a pizza at their wedding and so forth, but they don't have a right. Because if they have a right to have a cake, it means somebody else has a duty to make it for them, and that's correct. Not true. There's no duty to make a cake for anybody unless there's mutual agreement. If they agree on the price and so forth. So that's the crux of the problem, so to speak. But if you say we should repeal any laws that allow people to discriminate, they say, oh, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a blah, blah, blah. And that's not really it at all. It's all about property rights.
Right.
So nobody else is saying that. I think because they're afraid to, or else they don't see that that's the real issue. It's a property rights thing.
Well, through millennium, the checks and balances on marriage were with the family. I mean, if someone wanted to marry someone, it was the families that may have prevented that from happening for whatever reason. And now, of course, the person in the family that wanted to marry could have disobeyed the family. I mean, but they would have been ostracized in their own society, if you will, in their own family. But that's the culture of that particular area. In many countries and in many small, especially in tribes, the families are the ones that decide who marries whom. So it's not a matter, you don't even have a choice. But my point being is that the family is the one. Now, it almost smacks of, since we have the dissolution of the family is a very, very loose concept here in the United States. It seems like the government is filling in for where the family once had a place and a say in this, where today the family has very little say. You know, a guy grows up, you know, he meets a girl, he marries her, you know, no one has any say in it. So it seems like the government is filling in that gap, which I think is incorrect. But we don't look at the reverse of that as well. For example, what if a gay person wants a cake and the person baking the cake is not gay, so they don't go to that person. They look for a gay cake maker, right? Shouldn't that person also be liable for prejudice as well? I mean, if it's what's good for the goose basically is good for the gander. If the person who's not gay refuses to bake a cake for a gay person, if a gay person refuses to go to a straight person because they're not gay, should not the other person be just as liable as the other? I mean, you can't have a one-way street. It's got to work both ways. I know it sounds kind of silly, but I mean, I'm trying to the logic of this whole situation.
Well, yeah, that's the problem with your argument. You're thinking logically, and
I apologize.
You can't do that.
I'm sorry.
You can only think logically to promote some agenda kind of thing. That, you know, in fact, they call that Marxist logic, actually, because these people that I've gone to conferences with over the last few decades, I've met these people. And they say that it's impossible for a black person to be a racist because they're in the oppressed minority. Only white people can be racists.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, if you prefer one over the other, if you're white, you're a racist. But if you're black, you're just an oppressed person kind of thing. So there's two standards, one that applies to the dominant group, as the Marxists would call them, and one that would apply to the oppressed or suppressed group. It's a Marxist logic kind of thing. And, you know, the mistake you're making is you're using logic in both directions instead of just one direction. So that's not, are you glad I pointed out the error of your ways there?
Okay. Well, could we just take a minute and a half break right now for station identification? Would you please hold on and we'll get right back to you because we have a couple of other items we'd like to discuss.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you so much. Here we go. Folks, don't go away.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Folks, this is Joe Cristiano. This is Liberty Talk Radio, and with us today we have Dr. Robert McGee, and we are talking about several issues. And for first half, and then the second half, we're going to do the same thing all over again. Robert, what is your take on the minimum wage debate that is raging through America, and seems to be raging through America every single year, but it's heating up once again?
Well, this is an old debate, really. Friedrich Bastiat spoke about it in the mid-1800s. But, basically the belief is if you pay people more money, they'll have a higher standard of living, they'll buy more stuff, and everyone's boat will be raised. And, it's a win-win situation. I mean, that's how the argument is presented.
Correct.
But if you look at all sides of the issue, and there's two ways to look at this: utilitarian side, where you compare winners and losers, and then there's the property rights side. So I'll start with the mainstream arguments, the utilitarian side. Are there more winners than losers? And the economists that have done these studies, except those who work for the labor unions, of course, the economists that don't have a built-in bias, they find that there are more losers than winners, because if you raise wages above whatever the market rate is, if you do it by force, government force, some people will do better, the ones that keep their jobs, but then the people who lose their jobs do worse, because now they have no income instead of $7.50 an hour or whatever it is, and so they can spend less. And this filters through the economy as well, because business owners have to try to raise their prices so that they can pay these higher wages. And, if you have to pay $2 for a hamburger instead of $1.50, you just lost 50 cents.
Right.
So the vast majority of consumers lose something, but they don't see the losses necessarily. They just see that prices are going up a little bit. But, we have over 300 million consumers in the United States. So if 300 million people lose a little bit, and a few thousand or 10 or 20,000 people gain, $1 an hour or something, the overall losses exceed the gains. So from a utilitarian standpoint, raising minimum wages by law rather than by market forces, it tends to produce more losers than winners. And that's what everybody's talking about. They tend to think that raising the minimum wage is a good thing if the winners exceed the losers, and it's bad if the losers exceed the winners. But nobody's really asking about the effect on property rights. I mean, if you force business owners to pay higher wages, you're violating their property rights.
Right.
You're violating, because business owners should be able to do anything they want with their property, including hire workers at whatever wage they can agree on. And you're violating contractual rights, because they can't bargain on wages. They can't say, we'll pay you, $5 an hour or $2 an hour or 50 cents an hour. I don't think many people would work for 50 cents an hour in the United States. So, employers can't just enforce whatever wage they want on their employees. It's a two-way street. If you can make more money someplace else, there's a tendency to go somewhere else. So there's a market force here that sort of regulates what wages are. And, like I tell my students, you're worth whatever the market says you're worth. And when I go to some of these faculty meetings with the arts and science people, they're always complaining that the business professors make more than the English professors. And, I tell them it's the same thing Ludwig von Mises used to tell these guys, and then nobody forced you to be an English professor. Be an accounting professor.
That's right.
And they say, but I don't like accounting. And they say, well, I tell them, if you don't like accounting, then, just shut up, basically. You decided to be an English professor, then take the consequences.
That's right. Well, I was Peter Schiff gives a great presentation on this subject, and he mentioned recently that Puerto Rico is subject to the same minimum wage laws. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico has a standard of living one half of Mississippi, and so when they went to $7.25 minimum wage, the unemployment rate skyrocketed because, quite frankly, it was equated to $15 minimum wage in the States. So Now, if several years ago we raised the minimum wage to $15, as many people wanted to, we would probably have experienced the same unemployment rate. I mean, you could imagine going to a McDonald's and they're saying, yeah, here's $8 for your hamburger. It ain't going to work. And so as a result, the unemployment rate in Puerto Rico skyrocketed. Now, everyone knew this. I mean, this is not a covert operation. I mean, it's there for government statisticians to analyze and report on, etc. And yet they ignore that and they say, no, we're going to do it anyway because somehow it garners more votes and it lifts all boats, or whatever, which it does not. And I'd like to give you an exception to what you said, that no one would work 50 cents an hour. And I'll tell you why. I have an occupational health testing business, and we have technicians that we have to train. Typically, people come to us untrained. We have to train them. We need to spend hundreds of dollars to get them certified, et cetera, et cetera. And it costs us, when we bring someone on, for the first month or two, it costs us several hundreds of dollars just to get the person up to speed so they can go on their own on a job, and start generating revenue. If in fact a person that was totally unqualified, had no qualifications, came to me and said, Mr. Cristiano, if you will put me in your school, if you will train me, I will work for 50 cents an hour, I would hire that person. Now, that doesn't mean I want to pay $50 an hour, but once they are qualified and they can do the job, well, they'll be making something like $20 an hour, not $7.25. So I think what this does, and I mean this, I would do that if the government would allow me to do it. But once the government says you have to start this person at $7.25 an hour or $8 or $9 an hour, and I think of all the money I have to spend and then all the certifications that I have to pay for to have this person be productive, and if the person doesn't work out and leaves, and then my unemployment rate goes up, I'm shy. I've been there before, a dozen times before, and so I'm very reluctant to take anyone on at all. So no one's looking at the other side. It's almost as if the employer is being a meanie, and the employee is the nice guy, and would never do anything wrong. So I think people would work for 50 cents an hour based on the type of job and the training that they've received, because it'd be like going to school. Would you not agree with that?
Yeah. In fact, your example reminds me of something else. Last semester, I recall reading that Obama wants to force companies to have paid internships at a minimum wage or something. And like some of my students, they're looking for internships so they can get some accounting experience for 1 or 2 semesters, and some of those are paid and some are unpaid.
Right.
But one of my students came to me last semester and said that this one company she was interviewing with, they decided to cancel their unpaid internships because they might have to pay minimum wage if this proposal goes through. I don't know if it's gone through or not, but there was a proposal to force everybody to pay people for internships. And as a result of that, some of these internships are getting canceled because they can't afford to pay anything, because, like you pointed out, the students don't know anything. My accounting students learn their stuff out of the books, and when they go to apply it, that's when they learn the real accounting. And so they get these internships for academic credit for 1 or 2 semesters. But now some of the internships are drying up. They're going away just because of the threat that, government might make them pay whatever the minimum wage is, and they have to plan ahead of time, 1 or 2 semesters ahead of time. So they're just canceling to be on the safe side.
Yeah.
So my students are getting hurt, and students at every other university are getting hurt too, just because that's a proposal. I don't know if it passed, but the mere fact that it's a proposal is causing some companies to cancel these internships.
Right, and I said, and I have a comment to make about that, but we do have a call on line 1. We'd like to take that call now.
Okay.
Okay, line 1, please. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello, Joe.
Yes.
This is Lloyd from out in the deep woods.
Lloyd out in the deep woods. Okay. How are the deep woods today?
Well, it's starting to warm up out here, but I'd like to kind of play a little bit of a devil's advocate with Mr. McGee there. you're talking about property rights, people's freedoms, and it seems like as long as we're incorporated in this union that we call the United States, we're subject to the central controlling authorities. And if a union of states is good, if a union of workers is good, wouldn't a world government union be even better? And shouldn't we just concede and throw in the towel to our individual liberties and just give our whole selves over to a world domination?
Well, you certainly are playing the devil's advocate, that's for sure. Yeah, I'm a big fan of secession, actually. In fact, I've written a couple, or more than a couple, academic articles on that, and I've been criticized for it. But, if it was okay to secede from the British Empire, why isn't it okay to secede from either the United States, or if New York wants to secede from New York State, or Berkeley, California wants to secede from California because they're not leftist enough? If some kind of a majority or supermajority wants to do that, why not? I mean, if you begin with the premise that individuals have the right to choose their own form of government, if they don't like the form they have, they should be able to secede. That should be a one-way thing. You shouldn't have to get permission from the government that you want to secede from. And so I'm not a big fan of one world government, because the farther you get away from the people, the worse it seems to get. I mean, city government is corrupt enough, but then when you go to the state level, it gets a little worse. When you get to the federal level, it's becoming horrendous. People in Washington don't know what's going on in the state of Oregon or Mississippi or Maine or whatever. They're too far removed from the process. And the farther removed from the process you are, the worse it is, the interaction between the governed and the governors. And so if you go to the world government, especially if you let people in Western Europe and Africa and Latin America tell us what to do, that's an additional step in the wrong direction. I don't like local government, but I like it better than federal government, and I like federal government better than world government, because there's less opportunities for badness and corruption. The majority of governments in the world are worse than ours, believe it or not, although we're going in the wrong direction. The United States is still better than just about any other country I've been in overall. Some Scandinavian countries are pretty nice until you ask them how much they're paying in taxes. They pay over 60% of their income in taxes in some of the Scandinavian countries, but they still have free speech. Of course, there's nothing to talk about except high taxes in those countries. But so I mean, your question about the devil's advocate thing, it opens up a whole Pandora's box. But basically, I think the smaller the government is, the better it is. And there are ways to measure smallness, like how much do they take out of your paycheck. That's one way to do it, for the percent of GDP. So I think the smaller the take from your paycheck, the better the government is, for the most part.
Yeah, well, I was just hoping to throw that out there, because I like to reduce things to the lowest common denominator and extend things out to the ultimate eventuality. And it just seems to me that if you want personal liberty, you basically have to secede from society totally, and then you have only your own voluntary associations with your neighbors and friends, stuff like that. But when you start saying that you have to have a central authority in a community, a person should be able to say, well, I don't happen to like that particular one. Let me voluntarily just opt out. But in our world as it exists today, there's no option to opt out of anything. A state is not going to be able to secede. And you can't even secede if you're within a city. You couldn't say, well, we don't like the city government. Let's just our little community here on our 2 blocks, we're going to secede from the city. Do you think that would ever get by?
Not currently, but it depends on how many people become dissatisfied with the government, and if they have guns, to enforce their rights. But Ludwig von Mises spoke about this, and Murray Rothbard spoke about it, about how far down can you go in terms of secession. And, like you said, if you don't like the city government, you should be able to secede and do your own thing. And other people at the national level are saying, why not make all these government benefits voluntary? Like Social Security, for instance. You should be able to opt out of Social Security. It's a lousy investment. And, you know, if you die before you retire, you don't collect anything, and nobody inherits anything. If Social Security were privatized, there'd be a big wad of money waiting for somebody. And so you could have partial secession, like from Social Security. If you don't want to participate, you don't get the benefits. And the same with health care. If you don't want to participate in the government health care system, you shouldn't have to pay for it. So you can have a series of partial secessions and still be a United States citizen, a citizen of whatever state, and so forth. You don't have to have total secession. Although I'm a fan of total secession as well. I mean, you know, if you don't like gay marriage and you don't want to live in a country that allows gay marriage, you should be able to secede. And certainly, some states, the majority of people don't like gay marriage, so they should be able to secede if they think it's important enough. But other states like gay marriage, or they don't care about it one way or the other. So I'm basically a fan of people should be able to choose the form of government they want, and if they don't like it, they should be able to abolish it and choose another one. And that's why we seceded from Britain. And the southern states, you know, during the 1860s, they had the same idea. And the Civil War wasn't fought just over slavery either. It was fought over northern domination and oppression. And but the history books don't say that. They just say it was a slavery thing, and, you know, slavery's bad, which is true. But that wasn't why most Confederates signed up for the Confederate Army, and that wasn't why most soldiers in the North signed up for the Union Army. You know, they did it because they either wanted to preserve the Union or they wanted to abolish it.
Well, that smacks of the states' rights and the fact that the states were to be sovereign, and this the sovereignty of the nation seems to have been watered down to a point where they're subjugated to the federal government. And by the way, Lloyd, before you hang up, I want to start a movement, Lloyd for president. Is that okay with you?
It's okay with me.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to see if we can get your name on the ballot, because I like the way you think. You have any other questions, Lloyd?
Yeah, well, Joe, if I run for president, I would immediately let all the states be free, let all the cities be free, and let all the counties be free, and all the people be free, and I would make my pledge to not force anybody to do anything.
Okay. All right. Right on.
It's criminal.
Okay. Okay, Lloyd.
Yeah, I'm going to hang up. I just wanted to stir things up a little, Joe.
Thank you so much for calling. Appreciate your listenership. All right. You know, I want to tell a little story just for a second. You know, some time ago, my wife's an audiologist. She's in private practice. I opened up 4 audiology practices for her, and I know nothing about the business, but I did it anyway. And they seem to have worked out pretty well. She has 2 now, and she goes to 2 other locations. But a gal she needed some help, so she interviewed this gal on the job, and the gal had no qualifications, true qualifications for the job, other than she had some general experience, and that she liked working with people. And I asked her how much she wanted to get paid, and she told me the amount. It was unbelievable to just to be an assistant helping someone. I mean, she had no particular training in that area at all, and she wanted like $25 an hour to start or something. And I said, well, you know, really, with the first 2-3 months, you'll be going to our school, if you will. We'll be training you. We're going to be taking our time away from the practice to bring you up to speed so that you can be productive. And she said no. Well, my wife was really hell-bent on hiring this gal, and I said, I think this is a big mistake. And I asked the gal, I said, when I interviewed her, I said, well, when you go to school, how much do they pay you to go there? And she says, you know, you don't get paid to go to school. She said, you pay them. They don't pay you. I said, well, in fact, aren't you going to school when we hire you? We're training you on a job. And she couldn't see the connection. Well, as it turned out, she didn't work out very well at all. She was totally unqualified for the job. She just couldn't grasp what what was going on. And actually, she just left, because she couldn't do the job. But it cost us a fortune, because my wife did pay her almost close to what she was asking, and she was unproductive, took time away from the office. But we never hear about that. All we hear about the mean employers, and they don't want to pay people any money, and and the employees are starving while the owners are making so much money. They go in Hawaii every weekend, just to to relax. And it couldn't be further from the truth, and it just hacks me off. But before we have about 10 minutes more, because we started late, so we're going to go for a whole hour. Is that okay? Can we go for a whole hour? Okay. Is it okay with you if we go for a whole hour? We go for about another 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. I'd like to hear your take on the Greek bailout. This is one of my favorite subjects that I can rant on for about 6 hours, but I'll give you the floor on this one.
Okay. Well, I've read different things about the specifics. The one that comes to mind is that the Greek workers can retire at the age of, 54, 55, something like that, on 80%
right.
of
I think only 20 years of service, and that's all they need.
Yeah, and there's not enough money in the pension fund to pay for that.
Right.
So they're asking the Germans and the Spaniards and the Portuguese to pay for their pensions. And, with these IMF loans, they're asking American taxpayers to pay for it.
That's
because
correct.
Most of the money from IMF comes from U.S. taxpayers. It's a lender of last resort, which means nobody else thinks they're creditworthy. Therefore, American taxpayers are going to finance you, kind of thing. So, with the Greek bailout, Americans are going to be forced to pay for Greek pensions. So these people can sit around in cafes in their 50s and collect 80% of their regular salary. And some people are saying, the poor Greeks, they should give them the bailout, blah, blah, blah. And, if you want to use your own money, that's fine, but don't force American taxpayers or Germans or anyone who's a member of the European Union. There's like 20-some countries in the European Union, 26, 28, something like that. And but they're not all in the Eurozone, but that doesn't matter. Even the ones that aren't in the Eurozone are going to help pay the Greek pensions anyway. And why should they do that? It seems inherently unfair. If they want to retire in their mid-50s and get 80% of salary, let them do it. But let them finance their own retirement. Don't force other people to pay for their retirement. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. There's a lot of technicalities about all these meetings they're having, how are they going to finance it, and how can you finance somebody's retirement with loans? How are they going to pay it back? That's another thing. They're going to have to raise taxes or something, and raise taxes on who? There's so many people in Greece who aren't working. They have a high unemployment rate, and a lot of people work for the government, and they have a high, government sector. So, you borrow this money so you can pay pensions currently, and where are they going to get the money from to pay back the loans? Nobody's really talking about that. So that's my view in a nutshell.
Well, isn't there a hidden agenda here that we don't talk about? It's not hidden, but it's just not discussed. In that Greek ports are the gateway to the Mediterranean, from the east. And the Western powers, and I include the United States, don't want the Greek nation to be in the European Union and in NATO, so that the only ships that can moor on Greek ports, and of course that's their claim to fame is shipping. We've all known the Greek ship lines have been the biggest in the world. Stay within the Western sphere, because if in fact Greece they do not comply with giving more loans to Greece, then the fear is that the Russians will come in and say, we can finance you. All we need to do is build a pipeline through Greece, and we will pay you basically rent for the use of that territory. And with that money, you can pay off, a lot of your debts and use the money for pensions. Well, that would give the East a segue into Greece. And it would seem to me, logically, the way our paranoid government operates, that we will avoid that at all cost, and there is pressure on the EU to keep Greece in that European Union, partially, if not wholly, for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's a sort of complicated issue because, you know, a lot of people are, especially these days, are afraid of Russia with Putin, what he's doing and so forth. But and also, if Russia gets control of that, they can also cut it off. Like they cut off the supply of natural gas to Ukraine every January and February, it seems, because Ukraine can't pay the bill. So, you know, if you allow Eastern influence, bad things could happen. But, you know, if you look at the map, the Mediterranean is a big place. There are lots of countries that have ports there. And the reason Greece has been able to do so well is because they have laws that make it very attractive for building companies or shipping companies to do business there. You know, favorable tax rates and possibilities for evasion and so forth. So it's the reason Greek shipbuilding has become so big and popular is because of the tax benefits. If countries like Italy or any other country that bordered the Mediterranean wanted to have similar policies, then they could be the kingpin.
Yeah.
So, you know, the taxation and regulation are the reasons that the Greek shipping industry has done as well as it has. Other countries could follow their lead.
Yeah. Well, so,
we don't have to worry about Greece.
With the European Union, in effect, is in negative interest rates. Bonds don't provide that much of a yield. You may get yourself 1 or 2%. Now, the bonds on the Greek, the yield on the Greek bonds, I believe, were 14.7%. And please correct me if I'm incorrect, but I'm wrong. And so, what in fact Greece was saying is that we're going to pay you. The reason why we can tell you, we can give you or promote the fact that we pay 14.7% is because we are extremely high risk compared to everyone else. And basically we're saying you're never going to get your money because we not only can't pay the principal, forget the interest. I mean, the interest is so outlandish, we can't even pay the interest even if you forgave the principal. So when countries go in and they and buy these bonds, they know when they're buying them that the probability of getting paid is very, very low if it exists at all. And so why would not Greece just say, hey, you know, we told you by virtue of the interest rate that the probability of getting paid was about nil. So, you know, good luck. Sorry about that. You know, we're not paying anyone a dime. And then not pay. I mean, that would be the logical thing to do. I mean, if someone came up to me and said, gave somebody a loan and gave them, 50% interest, you know the risk is incredibly high and most likely you won't get paid. So wouldn't the same principle hold here? Didn't the European Union we know we're not getting paid because of the interest rates tells us that?
Yeah, exactly. In a free market, there's a relationship between interest rates and the risk. The higher the risk, the higher the interest rate. And if they just floated bonds and got the IMF and the World Bank out of it, then consumers would be able to decide whether they want to take the risk. And nobody who has any kind of intelligence would buy Greek bonds in that case because the interest rates are so high. As you mentioned, they probably won't even be able to pay the interest, let alone the principal.
Right.
But because of institutions like the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, and some of these other organizations, Import-Export Bank, they'll make loans to people who are countries, a lot of times it's countries, that aren't credit-worthy. They can't get money anywhere else, and so they're forcing the taxpayers of these countries that support the IMF to make these loans that are not market-worthy. So I think we should abolish the IMF. Actually,
absolutely, yeah.
Other Import-Export Bank, if you look at some of the shenanigans that they're involved in, and all these loans that always go bad, and the taxpayers of different countries are forced to pay these things, principal and interest, to bail them out all the time. I think the world would be a better place if we just abolished those organizations, because they make bad loans. They only make bad loans because people who have good credit can get money somewhere else. So the IMF only makes bad loans.
Why do you think Greece just did not say, sorry guys, ball game's over, doors are closing, we we ain't paying a dime, type thing, and just start from scratch. And then they could have at least released themselves of the burden of this debt, and then modified their pension plans and whatever, and maybe got themselves on an equal footing. All they did now was increase their debt load and made it even more impossible, if there's such a term, but to ever right the ship. They just there's no way. They dug their hole deeper instead of making it any better. And and austerity is good, by the way. Everyone should be. I mean, back in the early 1900s, everyone thought of austerity. Everyone worked hard. They thought of producing. They thought of saving. They always thought about the future. They never went into debt. Everyone worked in an austerity program, basically individually, and we got out of that mode. And why just didn't Greece do that, in your opinion?
Well, it's the same thing with other countries, too, only to a lesser extent. Greece is a good example because it's a little worse than average. But basically, politicians are buying votes by promising to give the people more stuff than their opponent. And the Greeks, traditionally have been leftists. There were even communists in there. They're still communists there, but especially after World War II, where the government promises to do everything for the people, and they're going to take the money from somebody else, kind of thing. And that's a popular argument. You can buy votes with that kind of thing. I think what they should do is just say we're not going to pay the debt, we're going to start over. But then a lot of losers, because the people who are on pensions now, people who are too old to work and so forth, they would lose big time. Their pensions would be wiped out, and who's going to take care of them? So there's a lot of losers. And when you lose everything, you tend to have revolutions.
Right.
So, that's one possibility. But what's the alternative? The alternative is to keep doing what you're doing, and that's unsustainable is the word they use a lot of times. But, basically that's it. And the population rate has declined. The birth rate in some of these Eastern and West European countries, they don't produce enough babies to even repopulate. The populations are declining.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
There aren't as many people pumping money into the system, and
right.
There are more people taking the money out because people are getting older. There's more old people as a percent of the total population than ever before. The population is aging, so more people are taking money out, and healthcare is pretty good. They're living longer, so they're taking money out for more years. There aren't as many people pumping money into the economy.
Right.
And Germany's been able to survive because they take in a lot of immigrants, and the immigrants are pumping money into the economy so
Correct.
that these 80-year-old Germans can continue to receive their pensions. And, when you take in a bunch of immigrants, you have other problems too, especially if they're from different cultures, and that's what they're experiencing in Western Europe and some other places.
Yeah.
So there's all these problems that result just because the pension system isn't privatized.
As I heard someone say, we are Greece, because we're doing the same thing. In fact, our population is going the same way. In fact, we are out of time right now, by the way, Mr. McGee, and we want to thank you so much for being on our program. Well, we want to give you the last 30 seconds to a minute to wrap things up and provide our listeners with information that you think is important for them to know.
Oh, okay. Well, if you want to summarize what we discussed in the last hour, the one common thread that runs through it is that government is not the solution. It's part of the problem, maybe the largest part of the problem. We should try to keep things as small as possible, give the federal government less power instead of more, privatize more things so people have more control over their lives. Let them do anything they want as long as they don't violate the rights of others, and that's the direction we should be going in. But it seems we're going in the exact opposite direction, so we need to turn that around.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on our program this morning. We do hope that you will accept our invitation to return again at a later date.
Well, you're giving me less than the minimum wage to be here. I'll have to reconsider.
Well, let me level the playing field for you. I'm getting paid the same amount as you are.
Okay. Well, now
okay.
I feel better.
You feel better. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and we do hope that you will return to our program at a later date.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you are either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You have been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.